that they're not getting effective demand into the hands of the people to clear the market of what can be produced. That's the theme, I guess.
That's the theme. But that we'll discuss at another point. Let's get this show going.
Good idea, I would say.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Yeah, welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure. Welcome to the program. A friend of mine and a friend of the universe and a friend of the intellectual community writ large here in the world, the United States and the world, and that's Eric Bronner, professor at Rutgers, major intellectual, if I may say so. He's kept his antenna up and kept track of a great numbers of things. We've done a great number of issues that confront the human condition very significantly. And he's written a recent book. That's what we want to take as our theme sort of today. It's called The Bigot. And it's subtitled again,
Why Prejudice Persists.
Why Prejudice Persists. A huge subject, and it's in many quarters it's being seen as a tour de force. And I think that it's bringing up an issue that's really relevant that isn't nearly discussed enough. We're going to do that. So good to see you again.
It's my pleasure.
Welcome, Stephen, to Manhattan Network.
Thank you so much.
So let's share with us again the book. When did you get the idea? Or maybe you could let you put forth the general theme of the book and what it is. You're dealing with this concept of bigot or the bigot. When did you get the idea to look into that seriously? And then we could talk about it.
Well,
and,
I did, before this, 2 books.
Yeah.
One on anti-Semitism, which is called A Rumor About the Jews.
Yeah.
And then I did a book on the Enlightenment called Reclaiming the Enlightenment.
Right.
And there's a sense in which the bigot is a natural derivation from these 2 books. You know,
I see.
Great books have been written on race, on sexism, on homophobia, on anti-Semitism, my own. But there's no. But what I found was, and is sort of something very simple, namely that the bigot very rarely hates one group.
Okay.
Usually, prejudice comes in what I call clusters.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So if you think of the Ku Klux Klan, or you think of the Nazis, or any sort of famous race prejudice group, I think you'll find that. So what I decided to do was to see what kind of dynamics or what kind of mechanics generates prejudice.
Okay.
And what I find is
subject,
and what I found is that basically similar psychological, political, and social elements come into play in each case.
Okay.
So in a certain way, the bigot is the foundation for other kinds of racism.
Yeah, I can see. That's why it's very important that it be addressed in that systems term.
Yeah. And
you've done that.
Yeah, I've tried.
And is there literature that you were able to repair to that got onto that, or are you starting off on a new field to plow in a certain sense, given the historical or intellectual history?
I mean, there is material on the phenomenon of prejudice, but not much that, interestingly enough, not that much that's new.
Okay.
I mean, most of the really good stuff comes is about 50 years old.
Okay.
And I thought this was of some importance because the new social movements that have arisen. That is to say, African Americans, women, gays, and the like. What has happened too often is that these groups often fight among themselves. And so what I wanted to do was sort of to solidify the enemy, or crystallize the enemy, and show that these different forms of racism, these different forms of struggle, actually have a great deal in common.
That would be interesting. Yeah. So you could see it as a systems thing.
Yeah, it's a systematic.
Did you try to cast back over the long sweep of history for examples? And are there some from ancient? We have some like Mencken and people that have been very, or social critics, but with the idea of the bigot particularly, because it's got a particularly pernicious quality, it seems to me, and one that includes a great number of people and give patterns, systems understanding patterns to critique the current situation.
Here's what I've sort of developed, which is since modernity began, we say about the 18th century.
18th, you say? Okay.
Roughly.
Modernity. Okay, yeah, okay.
And you can think of the Enlightenment,
right,
as the great expression of modernity. From that point on, immediately, a kind of counter-Enlightenment developed.
Right.
And I think that there are similarities over time from then till now. Let me give an example.
Please.
If you think of the Tea Party, when the Tea Party emerged right after the election of first election of Barack Obama, everybody thought, "Wow, this is really heavy. This is something new." I don't think it's new. I think that this is part of a tradition that reaches back to almost the beginning of the country.
The beginning of the United States.
The United States.
Okay.
So, for example, you had in the early 19th century the Know-Nothings.
Yeah, that's
they
true.
Were called, right?
I never understood it well, but yeah.
Very similar to then came the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, right.
Then came, after the Ku Klux Klan, the America Firsters. And then came McCarthyism. And then came the moral majority, and then the silent majority and religious majority.
You're right. Yeah,
you think about
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And now to make this even more, thank you, even more tasty, so to speak.
Yeah.
Most of these movements, they come from the same areas, and they have the same class base.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they have, if you like, very, very similar. I don't want to say the same, but let's put it this way: they have convergent ideologies.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example,
class-based, you say class-based.
Class-based.
I associated those kind of things in my mind, just loosely, with ignorance.
Well,
and
I think that's
maybe
the old
I'm wrong.
That's the old Enlightenment view.
Okay.
And there's certainly certainly true.
That ignorance reflects a certain class thing. Well, uneducated, lumpen.
The lumpen is certainly in there. But I'd like to go further because although I think ignorance plays a big role, and what we have to do is build our cosmopolitan sensibilities, learn about new places and new groups and so on. It's not just that.
Okay.
I think that bigotry or prejudice is a kind of worldview that justifies those groups that fear progress the most.
Fear progress. Okay, now we need
modernity.
A definition of
progress, right?
And,
let me give it roughly.
Okay,
that is to say, the emphasis on science, the emphasis on capitalist development or modernization, economic modernization, the emphasis on individualism and multiculturalism, and the expansion of the public sphere, and of course the expansion of democracy.
Yeah, right. And knowledge.
And knowledge, exactly. Rational knowledge.
Yeah, rational. Okay,
And if you think about the groups that support these movements that I mentioned, most of them are come from agrarian areas.
All right, that's not exactly in keeping with the urban tendency of the world.
Precisely.
Or civilization, I think, means city dwelling, if I'm not mistaken. The etymology of the word.
I'm not sure.
I'm not either, but I think that's from Whitford or something.
In any event, they come from the agrarian areas. Small shopkeepers, what we used to call the petty bourgeois. Obviously, your lumpen proletariat, and also certain, shall we say, let me put it this way, certain neighborhoods, ethnic neighborhoods, old-fashioned ethnic neighborhoods, tight in their values, tight in their sense of unity against the outside world.
Insecure, do you think, in their own identity? Maybe?
Of course. If you think of, for example, a small shopkeeper, in comes A and P.
Yeah.
He'll probably lose.
That's right, and there's been a lot of that going on in the modern experience picking up.
Think of
undercutting the means by which people had a sense of identity
right.
that they felt threatened by.
And this is particularly true for, if I can put it this way, unfortunately, white males.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Now, consider. Everyone in your audience knows the old TV shows, Father Knows Best, and Leave It to Beaver, and Happy Days, and Andy Griffith. I mean, you could go on and on.
Yeah, right.
If you think about all those shows, they have something in common. Women are in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Gays are in the closet.
Yeah.
And if people of color emerge, then they're doing menial tasks. And what's more, these groups are happy that way.
Yeah, our nation was founded on chattel slavery.
If you want to put it that way,
Our history has been a period of a few people running things and having a lot of slaves at their behest. That's been the historical pattern.
I think that's true.
People have had to adjust to, including people who were enslaved, had to somehow adjust to that kind of a situation in order to survive.
Indeed. But what we know and what you know is that these groups, women, people of color, gays, they weren't exactly happy in this situation.
No, I would think not.
Right?
I thought about this with a friend of mine. I thought, you know, they built all those pyramids there, and all those guys they had to get in pharaohs or whatnot, and they built it. I don't think those people were really happy pulling those great big stones across the hot desert floor.
Yeah, I tend to doubt it. Yeah.
You know?
But
they had to adjust to that.
But the image of the bigot has an image of these groups as happy because that justifies himself.
That's very psychologically interesting. Yeah.
And I think this is true with regard to the bigot's relation to all these groups.
Okay.
So how is it that that these groups are in revolt? And if you think of, for example, the last election, Obama's victories, the only group that he won, majority of, is white men. People of color.
True? I hadn't followed that carefully.
People of color, women, gays, all the different identity groups. Or the groups that were targets of prejudice.
Just a month or so, a few
Even
months
that.
Right.
It's basically white men. And if I quote a line in the book from a white supremacist band.
Okay.
And it says, "Whatever happened to our America, which once was white and free?" And I think that says it all.
Okay.
You know? But
that
today,
hankering after status quo ante that somehow doesn't
there's an imaginary
with the movements
community
that are caught up in a larger movement. Yeah.
There's this imaginary community which is put forward with the white the house with the white picket fence, Father Knows Best, the two kids, so on and so forth, which never was that way.
Okay, but we do reminisce that way. I was just saying to you, my early childhood was just great in Detroit. It was beautiful. Everything was beautiful.
Yeah.
People wish for that, or they remember it that way, don't they? Yeah.
And of course, they're helped along by media.
Yeah. Right.
Now, the reality, of course, is something different. I mean, obviously, people have nice experiences that they remember. Yeah. But I mean, let's face it: the condition of women, of people of color, of gay people. I mean, that was really quite
horrible.
something.
I mean, it was horrible. Or slave.
Yeah, or slaves.
Slave. You see that they got this new film out, 12. I was 12 years a slave or something like that.
I mean,
they're beating them and everything like that, and they had to adjust to that. Or a woman back in Paleolithic times, trying to, let's say she's 9 months along with a baby to be delivered, and she's starving, and she has to beg to get some carrion to live long enough to have the birth. I mean, somebody said history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. What?
Hegel once said history is a slaughter bench.
Yeah, it is ugly and hard and harsh, and people had to adjust to that relative to what's emerging now, perhaps.
Yeah, and this is particularly true with regard to the bigot.
Yeah, okay, please,
Because today, The bigot is adapting, as you put it,
Yeah.
to a more liberal society.
Okay.
Liberals, he's on the defensive.
Yeah.
And so a situation comes about in which today the bigot tends to appear as either the true believer.
The true believer. Who's that?
Or-
Is that?
That was
Eric Hoffer?
Eric Hoffer,
Yeah,
but
it was Eric Hoffer,
I
yeah.
stole the term.
Oh, you did not.
Or an elitist.
Oh, did you? Maybe you could.
No, I used it.
Oh,
in
okay.
the,
I thought maybe you would have been in a court.
No, I
having
cited.
beer with the man.
No,
okay.
he's a little older than I
Yeah,
am.
right.
So, three basic ways: the true believer, the elitist, and sort of the provincial conservative, the good old boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now if you think about all the policies that are around, nobody says, I'm pushing voter IDs and stuff because I hate black people.
Right.
Nobody says, I'm pushing, I'm opposed to gay marriage because I hate gay people. And nobody says, I'm opposed to Planned Parenthood because women are inferior. That language is sort of gone.
Yeah,
I mean, admittedly, there's still examples of old-fashioned racism, you know, like in Ferguson, like in any the shootings of young black men and so on. But I think the new phenomenon is that racist or prejudiced policies are pursued without the old language. So, how do we justify, or how is the voter ID stuff justified?
Right.
Well, we want to guarantee against fraud.
Yeah, right.
But there is no fraud.
Right.
How do we argue against gay marriage? Well, we're trying to protect tradition.
Right.
How,
well, that's the old saw, yeah.
And the same thing with regard to secularism and gays with regard to religion. We're standing for tradition and civility and stability in society. But in fact, it's the same groups who are being targeted in terms of illustration.
Right.
So one of the purposes of my book, of The Bigot, is to suggest that the bigot has adapted his language and his style to meet the conditions of a liberal, global society.
Is it something that's held, could we go back to Periclean Greece or something, through human history over a longer period? Has there been a manifestation of this that you could see if you've tried to look back that far, rather than just the contemporary couple hundred years or something? Is there something characteristic of the human condition? Does it have anything to do with a sense of loss of identity to something that is... You know, that kind of thing.
It may very well.
Part of human psychology, or something that's part of a longer tradition that we could be related to. You know.
In my book on anti-Semitism, I went all the way back.
Yeah. Okay.
And I suggested that, with regard to anti-Semitism, for example, the original kinds of anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish behavior were inspired by religion, primarily.
Yeah, a lot of them have.
Later, with the Enlightenment and so on, it was more social.
Yeah.
You know,
and it got to be racial. It got to be Aryan.
Well, that came later.
Yeah, it came later. Yeah.
And finally, it was political.
Yeah, then it became political. Yeah.
But for our purposes today, right? My concern with the bigot was a little different.
Yeah.
It really was there to highlight the political ways, the concrete ways in which bigotry and prejudice are fostered. Now, one of the things I found in historically, using your question, is there's a tendency for ideologies of prejudice to appeal particularly to right-wing movements.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
Now,
through history.
Through history, yeah.
We can identify a right-wing
you can think
attitude. It doesn't go... Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think the reasons are pretty obvious.
Okay.
Right-wing movements are usually authoritarian.
Okay.
They're patriarchal. They...
patriotic.
patriotic and chauvinistic.
Yeah.
They almost always are elitist in their...
well, that's reflecting history.
Yeah,
History has always been an elitist kind of proposition by and large, and most people wallowing around in the mud.
That is probably true, but even the people, the mass base of these right-wing movements, they may be wallowing around in the mud, but they think they're better than other people who are doing it,
right. Anything to get, and it's identity, a sense of identity you can latch on to get.
A world, and it's sort of a worldview, you know.
It's not just nationalism.
No, it's not just nationalism.
Okay.
It's more than that. It's that these groups, this basically reactionary movements are reactionary.
Yeah,
conservative movements want to conserve the past.
Right.
And if you think of the past as you know, really tainted with prejudice, you see the situation right away.
Right.
This isn't to say that blacks can't be anti-Semitic or even racist.
Yeah.
It isn't to say that women can't be sexist. That can happen too.
Yeah.
But I'm saying primarily, you know, it works out that there's a basic connection between the prejudiced ideology and the right.
So how do
it doesn't mean
it
doesn't mean that every conservative is a racist.
Right.
Which I've been accused of saying. It's not what I'm saying.
No, not at all.
You know, we can have different opinions on different things. You were talking to me about before about capitalism, the Capitalist Manifesto. We can disagree. Reasonable people can disagree on this or that. But if you see a party like the Republicans and a vanguard within that party, like the Tea Party.
Well, that's an extreme expression, it seems to me. I mean,
the Republican Party is a national thing. But just to finish up, if you see a situation where the entire agenda, it's not just this or that issue, but the entire agenda is directed against
progress.
Right, and these kind of groups, well, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, I don't care what the reason is that that the Tea Party member or the Republican gives for supporting that agenda. What I care about is the effect of that agenda on these people.
Right, you are, and it's particularly there. What about if I could just sort of cast a little bit out, or like. What was it? After Rome, we had about 1,000 years of political legitimacy. Well, political legitimacy, the legitimate order has been pretty much a matter of whoever had the biggest club was able to conquer other peoples. And with an army that supports their claim, set up then institutional structures with creation stories and PR that celebrates their thing to get a sense of national identity and all that sort of thing. And for about 1,000 years after Rome fell in Europe, it was remnants, I mean, this counter developments in other parts of the world. But you had royalty. You had a royalty system that people believed in. They got their sense of identity around royalty and allegiance to my liege lord and that sort of thing.
Right.
And that held for about 1,000 years. And I don't know if we put a dent in that when we started here in the United States of America.
I think we
But
did.
what I'm trying to get at is, we just had a visit from Prince William, and they still worship Queen Elizabeth. And they still worship all of these hereditary things that go back 1,000 years. They still fight in Eastern Europe over things that happened 1,000 years ago. And what are we to make of that kind of a clinging to the past? Where does that fit in terms of the kind of thing we're talking about? Do you understand what I'm saying?
That's an excellent question, and I think from my standpoint, what it suggests is the following: that there's so many sources of prejudice and bigotry.
Okay, prejudice and bigotry. Okay, right.
There's so many sources.
Yeah, right. There can be.
Carried over from the past.
From the past.
Yeah. And wounds run deep.
Right. But if I may, not only prejudices and that kind of thing, but reasons for there to be hurt or having to submit to an authority that did not give you legitimacy. I mean, the slave
no, I understand.
had no say over it. They had to do what they were told jolly well, or they didn't survive. So there's a lot of pent-up anger, if that's the right term, about the conditions in the past. But I don't know. It's getting confusing here.
Yeah.
But it's very confusing. It's very important to get down to it.
If you think about this, the first thing for a group to do, whether it's African Americans in slavery, whether it's women in the kitchen, whether it's gays, is to feel empowered and to feel that they can do something.
That's something one would want to encourage in everybody.
Exactly.
Right? Well, that's a progressive thing. You'd like everyone to feel liberated and pulling their own purpose and everything. Yeah.
Of course, this is the threat to the bigot.
Yeah, okay, that's a threat to the bigot of everybody because why?
Because insofar as they want inclusion into the public sphere, women, people of color, gays, and the like, obviously the power of white men and of tradition is threatened.
So the people that held on to those threatened, but then why do the masses still give allegiance to the Queen of England and Prince William in such dimension that it's you know, an outdated institution, and they still just cling to it?
That is certainly.
Is it somewhere akin to bigotry or what? Or clinging to a past that, and they were not of the real royal order, but they worship it. You understand what I'm getting at?
With regard to...
Or industrialists, or capitalists, or leaders, or whatever, or movie stars, or whatever.
I mean, there's a vicarious identification. But one thing one has to say for the English, they may identify with their royal family, but the royal family has no power.
When the royal family has an awful lot of money and influence in the public sector, and they have a big thing. He's over here making big contracts with major players and all that, and that they bow down to it.
Yeah, but once you notice, once a royal says something political, it becomes immediately explosive. And this, you have to think to yourself, English history.
If they act up, or but if they act with regard, they carry the Rule Britannia and all these kind of things.
Yeah, but this, this is gloss though. It's like watching a TV show or a celebrity.
Yeah.
But in terms of the power of kings and royalty, that's clearly eroded.
Yeah, it's common.
And this is actually very important for the bigot, because the attack on royalty was undertaken in the name of rights, human rights. And
right from Magna Carta on, maybe.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And this is another threat to the bigot, because it suggests that anyone under the liberal rule of law should be treated equally. Yeah, and that, of course, again undermines the.
It undermines the sense by which they get
their
or whatever from whatever that are their privilege, but they get a sense of identity.
Well, yeah,
is it that, or is that too common a word?
I think that's
they get a sense of identity, specialized identity to them. That they are the chosen thing.
Let me give you a
I'm
quotation.
Fishing around here,
this was called the clarion call of the French Revolution.
Okay, yeah.
It comes from Beaumarchais' The Marriage of Figaro.
Okay,
the play. It was left out of the opera.
Okay, really? Interesting in itself,
Figaro, who's a barber, says to the villainous count, right? What have you ever done to justify your privileges besides being born?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the key to everything.
Yeah, okay.
Where do you get your privileges from?
Yeah.
And with regard to the bigot, he constantly relies on natural attributes.
Natural attributes?
Yeah.
Spell it out.
What he sees is...
of he and his people that he associates with?
He and his people, and also the other.
And also a sense of prejudice directed against them by others who are snotty or above or ruling over or trying to be smarty-ass kind of people who think that they're ahead of where these people are and that kind of stuff.
Consider, you know, the way...
Talking about lumpen proletariat attitude.
Well, yeah, it could be, but sort of more generally speaking, you think of how... why can't gays be in the Army? Because if they're in foxholes with straight guys, supposedly, they're going to sexually molest them. Why can't women...
that was the prejudice,
That's the prejudice.
Yeah, right.
This is the way gays are seen. That's the way they are.
Yeah, threat.
Let me give you another another example.
Okay.
The first great classic American film was, of course, Birth of a Nation.
Oh, yeah, right. Ku Klux Klan.
Now, one of the interesting things in that film, which is a justification of the Ku Klux Klan, the film, is that the film suggests that inherently black men are trying to rape white women.
Yeah, that's all they're... Yeah, right, okay.
But, of course, in the period of the Civil War especially, and its aftermath, it wasn't black men who were raping white women. It was white men who were raping black women.
Yes, indeed.
And that kind, I call that projection.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's a term. Somebody used that. In psychology.
Freud used it already.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But that's an essential part, I think, of prejudice.
Yeah.
This kind of projection. So, for example, during the 1920s in Germany. And France in the 30s, proto-fascist groups or fascist groups used to suggest, well, the Jews are engaged in a conspiracy. They are assassinating people. They are manipulating the media. They are manipulating the government. They are running things. In fact, it was the fascists who organized in conspiratorial groups. It was they who engaged in assassinations. It was they who basically dominated the media.
Do you think they did that misrepresentation deliberately and consciously or unconsciously, or they knew what they were doing?
I think
that's propaganda or propagandistic.
I think they knew what they were doing, but they believed in what they were doing.
Okay, well then that justifies it.
And that's why at the end of the day, for the Jew who suffered from this in the 20s and 30s, it really doesn't matter what the person was thinking. The bigot was thinking.
No, but we want to try and understand the psychology of it all, don't we? Want to somehow. Where in the hell is it all coming from, and where is it going?
And I think the basic fear of the bigot is that fear of education, of progress, of reflection, of equality, of democracy, and of cosmopolitanism.
Okay, and then what we want to understand is why.
Because it threatens him.
It threatens, okay, when we say threatens him, her, I use the term identity, or the means by which people get a sense of understanding
I'm
of
right
their
because
role.
I feel it.
Okay.
And if that's the way you argue...
That's important to try and understand how people get a sense of it.
Yeah. If that's all there is, I feel this way, that closes you off to argument.
Yeah, well, you just... I've got freedom on my side and justice.
Yeah.
Or they could just use words
but
like
they're
that.
just using words.
Yeah.
They would say, listen, you don't get it.
Yeah, right.
You know? I'm French, I feel it. You... an intellectual using abstract standards of judges.
Pointy-headed intellectuals,
Exactly. Anti-intellectualism is part of the arsenal of the bigot. Going back. And this is all predicated on fear. And
fear's a big thing.
Paranoid fear.
Yeah, paranoid fear particularly.
And the further, you know, bigotry has a spectrum.
Yes, right.
Right, not everyone's a Nazi. Bigotry has a spectrum. But the greater the paranoia, the greater the fanaticism.
Okay.
The greater the fear, the more drastic the action. This isn't just a question of...
and this isn't just material interests or things like that.
No.
It's not, although it can include those, I
It
suppose.
includes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good, very true.
If somebody's going to have their estate seized or something, you know what I'm saying. Or
quite
there's
true.
not the transition between a major situation where there are certain economic interests, a certain means by which security is given to certain people is going to be supplanted by something else, and that transition is done brutally to where it is all lost, no possibility of a linking between the new development and the old way, encompassing the old way, but appropriately dealing with the new emerging reality. That should be the mark of statesmanship and so forth. And if that isn't provided a sense of continuity with the past and the future, in terms of the present, then we are in trouble sociologically, politically, and otherwise.
I mean,
and is the groundwork for understanding the source of the bigotry, perhaps? I don't know. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but something.
One of the other things that the bigot tends to do is respect tradition simply because it exists.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So in the South, for example, now there was an attempt to set up a monument to the founder of the Ku Klux Klan in Louisiana. So obviously blacks went crazy with regard, and mounted resistance and criticism and the like. The supporters of the monument said, well, what do you want? This is our tradition.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And so
we used to whoop you guys, that's all, you know, that's it.
right.
And you better get off on the sidewalk when you see us coming. And all that's God's way, you know, or some such nonsense.
And that kind of naturalizing of conditions, that also is an arsenal.
Them's the good old days, when they knew their place.
When they knew their place, exactly.
Okay.
And they liked it.
That they liked the place they were in, as you're saying. They like that. We got to put them back to where they're going to be happy with themselves, getting off the sidewalk when we talk about
you and I are old enough.
Giving us due respect.
You and I are old enough to remember the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
And
God bless.
The responses of conservative Southerners to the Freedom Riders.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? We know what our Negroes want.
Yeah, right.
Right?
It was horrible.
That was a constant refrain.
Do you know Stokely? I knew Stokely really well. Stokely Carmichael.
I didn't know him well,
Wonderful
but I met him.
guy. I loved him. He, among other things, you know what he was able to use was humor.
Oh, yeah.
And all that, I'll use the loaded term, bullshit that was going on, he was able to rise above it in a way with humor. I'm sorry, that's just a sidebar.
Yeah, no,
but it was such a major thing. It was such a traumatic thing that was done.
One of the things that he and
King
and Malcolm X and King, all of them in their each after their fashion, enabled people of color to see that their oppression was unjust.
Right.
And it was also irrational.
Yeah, right.
It was both.
Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah.
And getting them, once you can see that, then the possibility exists to change things.
And there was a major change going on. It was gut-wrenching for a lot of people. Look at Mr. Wallace and there was segregation forever.
So when
that's
people
some of the stuff that we're talking about when you're talking about bigotry.
Indeed. And one of the things that it's very possible, I don't know whether bigotry exists in every individual.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing.
I'm not sure it matters.
Okay, it's
what
worth
matters,
thinking about.
what matters is that the dominant...
Bigotry by another name, maybe.
Bigotry, well, that's what we have today.
By a less loaded term than that might exist in the human
The point is we have to marginalize the bigot.
Marginalize the conditions that create bigotry and sister aspects of human psychology that are close to it, not quite so loaded. That's an extreme form of something that exists in human nature that we ought to understand, deal with. How are we all going to get together somehow in a new kind of way that may be emerging now?
And
possibly?
I think today we're seeing some developments that are very important.
Thank you.
For example, we used to believe that that identity politics was opposed to class.
Okay, spell it out, yeah.
I mean, basically, if you want to have a black identity, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, powerful or unpowerful. You're a brother, so to speak. Or, in the case of women, you're a sister. Today, it's becoming more and more evident that class politics speaks to people of color, women, immigrants, gays, and so on. Because the majority of them, of these oppressed groups, are exploited and poor. And
poor? Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
The question then becomes, how do we help, or how do we develop policies that speak to the working class elements of all these groups without privileging any?
Do we have, let's say women, you've got a woman's going to run for president.
Then that's fine.
Maybe elected. I mean, so that's not exactly, they're coming on, they're merging in academia, they're merging everywhere.
Sure.
They're in the Senate and everything that's going. So they're not all oppressed and proletariat.
Quite right.
Okay, so there's and then I got differences between them.
Right, and there's no reason why women can't exploit women and blacks can't exploit blacks.
Yeah. And that could be based upon bigotry.
That can, but
within one group and so forth. And
it's more based on class exploitation.
Class. Then I think of class. I think of economics.
Yeah.
And I think of economics disparity.
Yeah.
That exists, and the economics disparity is pretty extreme in this country.
And it's very hard,
and around the world. Is
and
it
it's
not?
very hard to see if you simply are engaged in identity politics. You
Only
don't see class. You see black-white, man-woman, gay-straight. And
well, that's identity politics.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm talking about class politics based on economics.
Yeah, but hang on.
Okay.
One of the things we've seen is that as cultural progress has taken place, in terms of bigotry and prejudice, I mean, now you see interracial couples being common. You see sort of a general media dislike of bigotry and so on. Yeah. Even as this has developed since the civil rights movement, the economic contradictions and disparities have grown worse.
So how do we meld the concern with bigotry and class into some overarching system of understanding the human condition in this year 2014 as we look ahead to, let's say, 2025?
I'm glad you asked that. And that, I call that it's an old concept that I tried to develop, the class ideal.
Class ideal, okay. Yeah, spell it out.
Which means that activists within each of these movements, people of color working within organizations of people of color, women working in women's organizations, and so on, have to insist or begin to formulate programs that speak to the needs of working class people in all these groups.
Well, why working class people only? Because why not? If you're talking class again, you're talking economics. Is there maybe something wrong with our economic theorizing?
Yeah, well, that's
or is there the inappropriateness is seems to me not only bigotry with class and with the bigotry that we've inherited and that lumpen kind of thing, but it's also obvious in the terms of we do not have an economic system that seems to be doing what is needed in order for there to be general liberation of the whole of the human society that the Times may offer now for the first time. And we don't have leadership in terms of political theorizing and economic theorizing that's relevant. And that might come back to create the conditions out of which some bigotry comes because it's identified, it's undercutting the sense of identity of people who feel threatened economically.
The identity stuff has its limits. Yeah. I mean, for example, I've been called a bigot because I'm opposed to bigotry. I've been considered prejudiced because I don't take prejudiced ideologies seriously.
That's funny.
I mean,
sorry.
It is. I think it's cute.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about contesting the everyday oppression and exploitation of working class people in these groups.
Well, you can say working class
people, the exploited.
Okay.
Not everybody.
Well, that's what I was trying to not limit it to the working class.
Well,
okay.
If you want to deal with the economic system, that I think you have to begin with the notion of class.
Okay.
And what that means is activists within each of the identity movements have to raise the question of class and raise the question of class solidarity.